Hi, my name is Noelle Carrington, and welcome to my older adult video presentation. Before we begin, I just wanted to introduce my interviewee briefly. His name is Leon. He is 71 years old. He was born August 27th, 1946, and he lives across the street from me. So I've known him for about 10 years. I can always count on him for a friendly conversation with his, Caribbean-influenced accent, as he is an immigrant from Panama. And he did come over to the U.S. when he was 19 years old. So when we got this assignment, I really got to thinking, well, what makes Leon so darn happy in this stage of his life? So I thought that I would focus on this ego integrity versus despair stage, especially as I started to interview him and realized that he really is in the thrust of this stage of development. So what is the stage of development? Ego integrity versus despair is Erik Erikson's 8th and final stage of his stages of psychosocial development theory, and it takes place in late adulthood or old age, and Rogers describes it as people in older age reflect on their lives and take an inventory of their successes. People who are satisfied with what they have accomplished have a sense of well-being and peace, and those who are not satisfied have a sense of despair, and they mourn for lost opportunities. When speaking with Leon, it is clear that he reflects very positively on his life. So what contributes to this? What positive experiences, what accomplishments has brought him to the resolution in this stage of development? He is retired, so he has a lot of time on his hands, but he keeps very busy. He has a younger wife of 23 years. They moved out to Pennsylvania in 1995 and have a big house with a big yard, so it keeps him busy. His yard is his pride and joy, so that's a challenge for me to keep my children off of his perfectly manicured lawn. But we manage, and he's always very friendly about it, and is always willing to talk with my kids, and has a huge, big, boisterous laugh that just keeps the children around him. So he reflects positively on his life and his experiences. You can hear, even when I start to ask about any struggles he has, he really doesn't focus on them. He focuses on the positive aspects of his life and talks about his faith in God, and as a Catholic, how that has helped him through some of his struggles, and has said, through the mercy of God, he was able to come to the U.S. Through the mercy of God, he was able to have a roof over his head. So he definitely has that religious foundation. You see him exercising around the block. He takes walks. He's working on his lawn. He owns his own home. So there's always something going on with that he's coming over and asking my husband about which part he needs and things like that. So he's in good health and is able to do those things. And again, I think that we live in a very close neighborhood. We're in a semi-rural part of Pennsylvania where the houses are far apart, but it's a neighborhood kind of feel. We have big lawns and the houses are far apart, but we also are very close-knit. So we have enough distance where we're not in everybody's business, but we also come together, especially during the tough winters when our power is out and there's lots of snow. I can usually come out of my house to take my kids to school after my husband leaves pretty much in the middle of the night. He leaves the house at 2:30 a.m. So he's not there to shovel the driveway before I take the kids to school, but 9 times out of 10, it is already done because Leon has come over with his snowblower to do it for me. So that just gives you an idea of the neighborhood that we live in. He also has a neighbor, Woody, who's actually about 7 years older than him and is just as active, if not more active. So they are peers, and it is clear that they bounce things off of each other. They'll both go work on Woody's lawn, then they'll both go work on Leon's yard. But there's also this friendly competition to who has the better lawn, who got the generator done first this year, and things like that. So I think that competition keeps him going as well. But the thing that is significant is that it has not all been positive. So what are some of the challenges and some of the more difficult accomplishments related to this life stage? So one of the things that he did talk about was illness creeping up, despite his wife's younger age. They both have extensive medications that he talks about having to keep track of, and that he needs to watch his cholesterol and what he's eating, and making sure that he takes his walks. So that is definitely an element to his concern right now. Keeping up with the house is a challenge. Things break. He needs, especially when we have no power, that we need to make sure we get the generator going and all the extension cords and things like that. And I think of me doing it in my house, and for him to have to do that as well in his old age could be very challenging. He does come from a warm place and talks about the cold winters as being unbearable. He talks about his first winter here when he was 19 years old, and describes him as being very cold and just wanting to go home the first winter. So it's something that he does have to overcome and get through each winter. His younger sister has passed recently. He talks about her a lot. They were close. She was influential in getting him to come over to the U.S. So those things, definitely are challenging. He also talks about some estranged family members and some people that he doesn't trust anymore, with, a certain sadness in his voice. It does not overcome him by any means, but it is definitely, something that weighs on him. Lastly, and I think the most significant event in this stage was the murder of his son about 3 years ago. And during that whole time, he was obviously devastated and was really obsessed with the trial and everything that was coming out of that. Every time we talked to him, he brought it up, and it was really on the forefront of his mind. So, that definitely was a traumatic event that he has endured in this final stage. But he still maintains this positive, upbeat attitude and perspective. So this brings me to this resilience discussion. And I just wanted to point out that in some of the articles that I was reading for the annotated bibliography, it kind of made me realize that when we're talking about ego integrity versus despair, we really can't talk about it in a vacuum, because all of the other life stages have led up to this, right? So what contributes to Leon being so resilient in being able to overcome something like the murder of a son, the death of his sister, and not be bitter and not be depressed? So in the article titled Resilience in the Context of Erikson's Theory of Human Development, the researcher was able to support the claim that developmental outcomes and resilience are closely related concepts. So this idea that he was able to resolve the crises in his other stages of development in normative circumstances, allowed him to cope with this terrible trauma and adversity that he experienced. So that was interesting to me and definitely provides some evidence into the fact that we have to look at some of Leon's other life stages. Similarly, in midlife Ericksonian psychosocial development, setting the stage for late life cognitive and emotional health, that study indicated that higher midlife Ericksonian psychosocial development was associated with stronger global cognitive functioning and executive functioning and lower levels of depression. This is significant for me because it stood out to me that it was around 33 or 34 that Leon finally settled into his career. He talked about doing odd jobs in the fashion center district, food services, and odd jobs, up until his friend offered him the opportunity to come over to the New York City Transit. And when he reflects on this job, he talks about it with a lot of pride. It really has become a part of who he is and his identity. So contributing to that stagnation versus generativity phase, he felt very accomplished being in that job, especially when he talked about his experience through the 9/11 attacks and said, we stayed there for weeks, we didn't go home. He talks about the we, the sense of the we and not the I. So really, I feel like we can't look at this final stage of development without looking at the fact that he was able to find this career that he really vested himself in, that he felt he was influential and an important player in that job. So what is the psychosocial crisis that's being resolved? And what the literature says is that basically this crisis is about looking back on your life. So Leon is in the process of looking back on his life with a sense of accomplishment and pride as he speaks about his children, his grandchildren, his career, his spouse. He doesn't speak of his life as someone would in a state of despair, which would be characterized by the individual experiencing feelings of disgust, anger, regret, or bitterness. In the same article, narrative therapy was offered as a valuable intervention for individuals in this final stage of development who may be experiencing despair. And really quickly, the therapy seeks to essentially adjust someone's inner life script to reframe the social constructs that influence their judgments on themselves so that they can reflect more positively on their experiences. And I'll give you an example of this really quickly. When I was doing Leon's family tree, it started to come out these multiple wives. So it was, by the end, it was 6 wives that he had had. And when I think about if I were to look back on that in my life, given the social constructs that I have grown up with, I would have looked at this, I might look at this as failures in love, failures in relationships. But when Leon referred to his 6 wives, he said, I've experienced a lot of love in my life. And that was a key element to this narrative therapy. And it really is just the way that he is reflecting on the same event that I would have reflected on in a negative way. He's reflecting on it in a positive way. So the role of the social worker in this stage would really be to have the client experience and look back on their lives in a positive way. And that's what the thrust of the therapy would involve.